Hey guys, what's up? It's Jay from Sony Alpha Lab, and what I got here today is two 50mm lenses. I got the Sony FE f1.8 lens versus the Sony FE 50mm f1.4 lens. Now, these lenses are clearly way different. This is pretty much the best money can buy, and this is the cheapest possible option available with autofocus, and manufactured by Sony slash, Zeiss in this case, but via Sony. So I just wanted to do a 2-for-1 review here. So I'm going to compare these two lenses, and I think at the end of this review, you will know which lens is right for you, and perhaps we'll learn a few other things. All right, so stay tuned, guys. Okay, so for starters, we have 1500 versus 250. Max aperture, 1.4 versus 1.8, you could see there. Then what we're looking at, weight-wise, the Zeiss is way heavier, 1.7 pounds versus 6.5 ounces. It's way bigger. Filter thread, we're looking at 72mm versus 49mm. Aperture blades, we have 11 blades versus 7 blades. Lens elements, we have 12 in 9 groups versus 6 in 5 groups, as you can see here. Minimum focus distance is 1.48 feet, as you can see here. Stabilization, both lenses don't have it. Manual aperture, the Zeiss lens does. Aperture declick, the Zeiss lens does. Weather sealing, the Zeiss lens does. Focus motor, the Zeiss lens has a better, faster, quieter focus motor. Build quality. All right, so when you're looking at these two lenses compared on the turntable, it's very obvious the Zeiss lens is built better. It uses much more metal as opposed to plastic. It has way better features. However, the Sony lens is quite good. Considering the cost, it's built really well. The focus ring is very smooth and buttery, better than I expected. Okay, so I have the 50mm f1.8 lens mounted currently on the A7R III, and I just wanted to show you how it focused and how loud it is. Relatively slow. I mean, it's fast enough, but you're not going to track high-speed moving subjects in continuous autofocus mode at 10 frames per second. That's not going to happen with this lens based on the speed I'm seeing here. Very smooth, very smooth. All right, so here it's in auto mode, so then you can select the aperture on the camera, but you can turn it and you can actually click it to whatever aperture you want. So right here on the side, see that? You can declick it, and then when you rotate this, nice and smooth. See how it's buttery smooth now? If you put it back on, turn it off, turning the aperture ring, and I have it declicked, so it's nice and smooth, and you can see that there. Works really well. I really like this focus ring as well. Nice and buttery, and it's large. Very easy to grab because it's so big. So you can hear the focus. Not exactly silent. Alright, so for this segment, I'm just going to go over some real-world photos that I took with both lenses so you guys can see what you actually get in the real world with a $250 lens versus a $1,500 lens. So, on the left-hand side here, we have the Zeiss 50mm f1.4 lens, and on the right, we have the regular Sony 1.8 lens that's much more affordable. So when you're looking at these two photos here, you can see the color is slightly different, so they do render different color-wise, but otherwise they look very similar, especially this photo. If I zoom in here, you can see the snow sharpness detail, and what you have on the left is slightly better quality. You can see here along the edge, there's a little bit of purple coming in, and you do not see that on the more expensive lens. But otherwise, you really can't tell other than the slight color shift difference, okay? All right, so again, on the left, we have the Zeiss lens, and on the right, we have the regular Sony f1.8 lens. And again, you can see the Sony lens is a little bit warmer. I'm using auto ISO, by the way, and these are actually shot in JPEG mode. So in general, this lens tends to expose warmer than the Zeiss lens for whatever reason. But that's the results I'm getting whether I'm shooting RAW or JPEG, just so you know. But it is auto white balance. But as you can see here, both images look great. Okay, I mean, there's very little difference here. You could argue about how good the bokeh looks. The one on the left is more buttery, perhaps, but the one on the right, on this particular shot, they both look great, in my opinion. All right, so now we're looking at two images of my shed. Okay, now the one on the left is the Zeiss lens, and it's a little bit colder. You can see the blue versus the warmer image on the right. But other than that, they look very, very similar. You can see on the top here, it looks like the bokeh is nicer on the Zeiss lens. And as when you're zoomed in, you can definitely see the difference here. You see a lot of that weird color. There's like cayenne and green or you know, purple and some kind of like greenish blue color in this bokeh area. And it just makes it look more messy. You see that? You can see it here, the green, and you don't see near as much. You see a little bit of purple on this one, but not too much. So clearly, and then again here, you can see that green fringing on the high contrast areas. And this is just a standard shot off the deck just to show you depth of field. And in this type of image, similar to the hummingbird feeder, you can't really tell much of a difference. They look pretty similar overall. All right, so here's another shot, and you can see on the left is the Zeiss lens, on the right is the Sony lens, and they look very, very similar. So at the end of the day, you get killer depth of field, sharpness, quality. You know what I mean? They look great. So here's a picture of my friend's truck at work, and you can see on the left we have the Zeiss lens, on the right we have the Sony lens, and for the most part they look very similar, especially looking at it this way. So let's take a look at the out of focus areas and compare those. Now you can see here on the right we got a little bit of green in the snow puffs here and things like that, and I am not seeing that on the Zeiss lens. Alright, so on the trees again you have this green fringing, and there's not any of that noticeable on the Zeiss lens comparatively. Maybe there's a hint of it. You can see a hint of the green here now that I look actually a little better. You do see a hint of the green, but it's not near as exaggerated as on the cheaper lens. So is this a deal breaker? No, definitely not. The cheaper lens is really good. Okay, it's definitely not as good as the Zeiss. I mean, that's clear as day. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're talking 1500 versus 250 here, guys. So looking at lens flare, what we have here on the left, you can see right here, there's a little bit of lens flare on the Zeiss lens, but not much at all, just a little bit. Now on the right, you have the Sony lens, and you can see the lens flare is much more noticeable. It's like a big ball, and so forth. I played around, tried all different angles, all different apertures, and this is the best example I could find to compare. Okay, so you could see the difference there. So, all right, so food photography. I was shooting in JPEG mode for these images, and on the left side you have the Zeiss, on the right you have the regular Sony lens, okay? And you can see they both look great. I mean, at the end of the day, like, look at these two shots. They both look great. Can't go wrong with either of them, really. But when you zoom in, you could see, again, the Zeiss lens has different color, more accurate color rendition, and it's also sharper, okay? Now, the Sony lens is acceptably sharp, but it's not this killer sharpness that you get from the Zeiss lens, you know? So other than that, though, when you zoom out, like if you're sharing this on Facebook or some crap, you're not going to notice the difference. All right, so here's a real-world portrait sample. And I got Layla, my model here. On the left is the Zeiss lens, and that's shot at f1.4. And on the right, we have the cheaper lens, and that's shot at f1.8. Now, you can see overall the images both look good, definitely, but the bigger bokeh balls, it just makes, it looks like a more 3D image when you look at the image on the left, in my opinion. All right, so looking at the sharpness, it looks really good on both lenses, as you can see. Both lenses look excellent here, okay? Now let's check out the bokeh balls. Let me zoom over here. So now these bokeh balls obviously have that green fringing around them. The ones on the Zeiss lens have a little bit of green fringing, but not near as much. You know, it's noticeably less. All right, so here's another example of a comparison. On the left, we have the Zeiss lens at f1.8, and on the right, we have the Sony lens at f1.8. And the most noticeable thing to my eye that I see is the round bokeh balls versus the almond egg-shaped bokeh balls on the right. Now, you could see the cheaper lens, the bokeh balls turn into almond oval shapes much quicker as you move to the corner, whereas the Zeiss lens does not. It holds onto that circle much longer. Eventually, it does start to oval out on the Zeiss lens. I cropped these photos a little bit, but it's definitely noticeably better for a larger portion of the frame coverage. And that makes sense, okay? Be sure to check out my lab sample photos on the 100mm f2.8 STF lens, and that has perfect circles corner to corner. Unbelievable. Definitely worth checking out when you guys get a second. All right, so here we're comparing f2.8 versus f2.8, and here the quality difference becomes a little bit more apparent in the bokeh ball renderings, because when you zoom in, you could see the sharper corners on these bokeh balls due to the less diaphragm aperture blades, 7 versus 11. And on the left, there's 11 blades, so they look more round. You could still see them squaring off a little bit here. All right, so this is the last comparison. We're looking at f4 versus f4 Zeiss lens on the left. Now, when we zoom in, again, look at these bokeh balls, all right? The ones on the right don't look near as good. They're squared off, although they still look good. Don't get me wrong. It's not like they look bad, but they don't look as good as the Zeiss. Now, on the right, the Sony lens focused a little further back on the rose, so the sharpness is still really good. It's just not in the front of the flower. So here is a pretty good example where you can see the sharpness of the Sony lens, and then the sharpness of the Zeiss lens is in they focused on a slightly different portion of the rose, but you can still see both lenses are extremely sharp, as you saw in all the other examples I showed you. More importantly is the aperture out of focus area in the bokeh balls. That's more noticeable in this particular frame. More real world photos I wanted to show you. They're not one-for-one comparisons, but just a couple of shots with both lenses that I thought were fun and illustrate some real world photography, when it comes to what you're actually going to use the lens for. So here's a few of Jace, and he was excited because he just got this cool pen that talks, and Michelle was hooking it up to the different books for him. He was very excited, but you could see just how awesome the separation is, and it really, makes Jace pop from the photo because the background's blurry, the foreground's blurry, and it's just awesome. And this was with the Zeiss lens at f1.4. I asked Jace to smile, and that's what he gave me, and then he laughed. All right, so here's one with the regular Sony lens, just looking at Beaver Dam Lake. And you can see this shot. It was taken in JPEG, but the quality is very good overall. You can see the sharpness, clarity, etc. It looks really good. Here's another one of Bones Jones on the deck, and this was shot with the cheaper Sony 50mm lens. And you can see sharpness is really good. I didn't nail it on his, eye per se, but you could see here in the center where it focused on the hair, very, very sharp. Okay, it's not that insane razor blade tack sharpness that you see from the Zeiss optic, but it's still very good. Here's one of Charlie, and you can see he's got this weird thing on his eye, but the sharpness is very good here, and this is taken with the Zeiss lens. Now here's the Double Indian Pale Ale from Equilibrium. It's called D-Hop 8, and as you can see here, it looks quite awesome. I actually have a little bit of video footage of a beer being poured in a glass. I will show you in a second. Now here's another one. Looks pretty good. And here's another angle. And you can just see that background is so buttery that the 3D pop is really impressive, and it makes the can stand out. Now here's another one of Bones Jones. Now this was taken with the Zeiss lens, and when you see the clarity, you'll be like, oh yeah, okay. All right, I understand. Okay, it does get you better clarity and sharpness and all that. Yes, it does. Here's one of Layla. And I really like this picture. I took it downstairs, but I just like the way that she looks for whatever reason, And then when I zoom in, you could see the insane clarity, tack sharp, awesome quality from the Zeiss optic, okay? So it really does have a look to it. There's just no doubt about it, all right? Now, here's another one. Looking at some band players, and you can see the out of focus area. This is taken with the Zeiss lens. Really good quality overall. Nice 3D. And here's another angle, the sax guy. Now this particular image looks very 3D in my opinion, and it's just the way I framed it in particular. I purposely, took the photo at this angle to exploit the 3D, knowing that the background was very far away. It would create this fall off type image, and also the lines on the parking lot help draw you in. So this image has a lot of 3D pop like qualities to it, but the Zeiss lens really does show a difference, in my opinion, when it comes to a photo like this. I did not take a shot like this with the other lens, but just based off the other sample photos I've taken, the other lens would also look great with this particular shot. Don't get me wrong. It just won't have that same 3D pop to it. It's hard to really put your finger on it. Here's another angle. And here's another angle. I just wanted to show you what f1.4 versus f1.8 looks like. And as you can see here, I focused on the quarter, and you can see the background out of focus area. The bokeh balls are a little bit more round and larger on the f1.4 lens. However, they both look awesome in my opinion. You can see the background separation is excellent. The blur looks great. The bokeh rendering looks great, in my opinion, on both lenses. But clearly the f1.4 lens offers larger bokeh balls, which makes it, the render is like more buttery, okay? So that's what you're looking at there. Now when we zoom in and you look at sharpness, you can also see wide open, the f1.4 Zeiss lens is way sharper than the 50mm f1.8 lens. All right, so here's the same exact shot, except now I focused on the lab scene. And you can just see how the quarter looks in the front and the bokeh balls, how they differ. You could see there's a little bit of curvature here, and they're more almond shaped on the more affordable 50mm lens. You could see how the circles here are below the black square, but on the cheaper lens, they're more almond shaped. Okay, so now looking at the full lab scene, I wanted to compare sharpness quickly. So when we zoom in, you can see the sharpness difference. On the right, we have the 1.8 lens, and you can see wide open, it's not near as sharp as the Zeiss lens. And on the chrome, shiny stuff here on the quarters and the coins, you can see the chromatic aberrations, the purple fringing, noticeably more on the cheaper lens. And same thing with sharpness detail. You could really see it on the text and the paper detail here. All right, so now comparing apples to apples, we're looking at f1.8 versus f1.8. Again, the cheaper lens is on the right, the 1.8 lens. The Zeiss 1.4 lens is on the left. So let's zoom in here and let's see what we got. And again, as you can see, 1.8 versus 1.8, not even comparable. The Zeiss lens blows it out of the water. Now, on the right, obviously this is the same shot from what we just looked at before, but the Zeiss got way sharper. So, on the left, f1.4 versus 1.8 is a noticeable increase in sharpness. Obviously, the lens on the right didn't change, but I just wanted to show you. So, 1.8 versus 1.8, the Zeiss blows it out of the water. 1.8 versus 1.4, the Zeiss is still sharper, but it's not near as noticeable of a difference. Okay, so now at f2.8, you can see they're starting to catch up. The Zeiss lens is still sharper, but the Sony lens is starting to crisp up quite good here. The 1.8 lens, they're both Sony lenses, but you know what I'm saying. So you can see here it's still a little bit muddy compared to the Zeiss, but it's definitely starting to crisp up, and the colors and contrast are starting to get a little bit better. All right, so here we're comparing f4 to f4, so let me zoom in. And here, again, you can see the cheaper Sony lens, the f1.8 lens, is really starting to catch up. But now it's much closer to the Zeiss. The colors are slightly different, and the rendering is also a little bit different. But at the end of the day, they're both very sharp, and they both look really good. The out-of-focus areas look pretty good, and sharpness is pretty good. Now here you could see the corners of the aperture blade on the cheaper lens. On the more expensive lens, it's still nice and round. I just wanted to illustrate the distortion and vignette here using the Lightroom lens correction profile. So right now I have the profile enabled, and when I uncheck this, the distortion and vignette will come back. Okay, so you can see in the lower left in particular the vignette and the distortion. If you look at the vertical lines and stuff, you can see it just that little bit. Really not much distortion at all, but the vignette is pretty heavy at f1.4. So let's look at the cheaper 50mm lens. So here's the f1.8 lens, and here's what it looks like without the profile. And you can see again, very heavy vignette coming in. In the corners, you could see it really well down here on the lighter wood area, the lower left. Turn it off again and back on. But distortion-wise, this lens is very good. Very, very little distortion. Actually, noticeably less than the Zeiss lens, as far as what I'm seeing here. Yeah, it's definitely less, at least based on this Lightroom correction profile. I just wanted to show you what the 50mm f1.8 looks like mounted to the A7R3 while I'm sitting at my dinner table, and you can see the kitchen is behind me, but because of that full frame sensor, the background is all blurry. That's what's so awesome about this format, and I just wanted to give you like a quick real world example. The camera's basically like, I'd say about 2 or 3 feet away from me, so I'm pretty close to it, and the kitchen is about 5 feet behind me. This counter, I could almost reach the counter, and then behind that is the sink and stuff, but you can just see the separation you can get with this lens, and for such a fair, you know, affordable price, the performance is quite good, especially for use like this. If you're like a vlogger, you know, or you're doing content uploading on YouTube and you're reviewing stuff, or you're just talking to a camera like this, you really get that awesome background out of focus and killer sharpness and everything else that you would expect from a camera system like this. Note the sound of the focus motor. Alright guys, so now I'm using the Zeiss 50mm f1.4 lens, and that's also an FE lens, and I'm just doing a quick test at the dinner tables here, so you can see the difference between 1.4 and 1.8. You can see the background looks quite good. It's very blurry, nice 3D separation. It looks really sharp to me. I'm looking at the screen here. It looks like it's pretty sharp. Quick video test just so you can see my face, and if you look, I'll go off screen. Alright, so there's on the background, and now I'll come back. And you can see, works pretty good. So this particular beer is called Equilibrium MC Squared, and just a phenomenal, delicious, frosty beverage, I gotta say. So I actually lit this from the bottom. I put a spotlight below the beer glass aiming up, and I just used clear glass pane for the table to create this effect. Alright guys, it's time for the conclusion. Now, if it were up to me, I would definitely go with the more affordable 50mm f1.8 lens. Quality at the end of the day is really good. You're looking at the real world photos. It's kind of hard to tell the difference when you're zoomed out on a lot of the shots. Now, obviously, the Zeiss lens is way better optically and build quality wise, but $1,500 versus $250. I mean, it's just such a huge difference in price that, you know, you really got to be a professional to justify the money to get this lens, in my opinion. Alright, so for other options, we have the Rokinon 50mm f1.4 lens, and that goes for approximately $700. Now, I checked out a couple of reviews. I haven't reviewed it myself, but the build quality looks really good. The image quality also looks really good. It's about a stop or so behind in sharpness than the Sony lens, very similar to this one here. It's just a little bit behind in sharpness. Also, the video tracking, the AF, works really well, better than the Sony Zeiss lens, according to some people that have tested it. Autofocus tracking is a little bit faster, but not quite as accurate as the Sony. The focus noise on the Rokinon is noticeably louder though, however. It has a slightly smaller filter on the front, 67 versus 72 on the Sony. So it's less than half the price though, and the quality is almost there. You know, it's really close. So that would definitely be worth considering. The other options, well, Sigma is coming out with a 50mm f1.4 lens, and it's the Art series, which is just killer. They already have it in a bunch of other mounts, and it's a phenomenal lens. It's going to be noticeably better than the Rokinon based on the reviews of the one they currently have, and more on par with the Sony lens as far as optical quality throughout the entire range. And that's going for about $950. It's not out yet. So you're looking at $250 for this guy. Great lens, highly recommend it. And then you got for $700, you got the Rokinon or Samyang option, 1.4. It's a very good lens as well. Then for $950, Sigma's coming out with an f1.4. Definitely hang out for that one. I would wait for that one personally if it's in your price. Obviously, if you have the money, you could then go for the best possible option, which is the Sony lens, okay? At the end of the day, guys, I would definitely get the much cheaper 50mm f1.8 lens for general photography. If you're a professional photographer, then you might want the better optical quality and the better build quality. If you're doing video, you might want this, floating aperture declick feature. You might like that. Focus-wise, they both focus pretty good. This one's noticeably slower and noticeably louder. However, the Zeiss lens is pretty loud too. It's not exactly quiet. Lab testing-wise, obviously this lens isn't as sharp, but it's still pretty darn sharp. I'm using the 42 megapixel camera here too as well. So the resolving power is not going to be as good on this lens compared to this lens. So it is what it is. If I had unlimited money, of course I would want the Zeiss lens, but it's much heavier, bigger, bulkier. All those things come with it. So you got to factor all those things in depending on what your budget is, okay? So at the end of the day, I did really enjoy this lens, and it's a phenomenal quality product. But like I said, Sigma's coming out with one, an f1.4. It's going to be $950 versus $1,500. So I would wait for that before getting this lens. Otherwise, I would definitely go for this lens, $250, full frame format, and for the money, it's killer quality, okay? Like I said, it's not as good as some of the other lenses, but $250, guys. You got to always remember, the price does really matter. So that is it for this review. Please let me know what you think below in the comments area. Ask questions. Please put in requests for future reviews, and be sure to subscribe. Hit that notification button there so you get the little email when I put out a new video. I put all the links below the video for my E-mount lens guide, which has all the Sony E-mount lenses. Be sure to check that out. And I'll also link to, the different products I'm reviewing. So have a great day. I'll catch up with you next time, and please be well.